Talking about emergency stop switches for engines that are on boats that are fast enough to cause damage or problems if you fall out or you lose control of it. So what we're talking about are safety stop switches to stop the engine when you fall out of the boat or fall away from the steering wheel. And the first, the most complex, are the two-cylinder engines which use a Magneto system. That means two coils, two sets of points, two condensers. And what we have to do is we have to short the points out, both sets of points to ground, which is somewhat difficult to accomplish. What we do when the ones that do not have grounding wires, some of them do, some of them come with grounding wires. Here's a Phelon ignition that had the grounding wires already in it from a Mark 28A. You can see these yellow wires. They went to the back side of the 2 points, and when you press the button on the front of the engine, it shorted each one of these wires to ground separately. Otherwise, when they were running, they were not connected. So what we're going to do is show you how to hook up one of these on an engine that does not have these shorting wires. So what you want to do is you have to put in your own wires like those yellow ones. We rig up a separate wire to each set of the points, and we do our best to lead them out at a good point. Typically, I try and drill a hole in the plate fairly close to the wire so it'll come out with this wire and I can stay strap it or tape it to the ignition wire that's already there. What's most important is wherever they do come out of the plate, you want to make sure they don't hit at idle or wide open throttle and scrape and short out. You want them to make sure that they stay free from being chafed. So we would hook this up. In some of these cases, you'd run the wire along here, go in through this little place where there's a pad. You can see there's a wire coming out of it. There is room for a second wire. Same thing on the other side, same deal. And you'd want to rig it up like so. We now have coming out of this Magneto, we have some wires, two wires going to each set of points. Okay, now I'll show you a couple of others. This would be a newer Phelon Magneto, again, two coils, and on this one you can see this is how they've run the two shorting wires. This is a newer engine which already has the shorting wires. If you already have them, you don't need to do this part of it, but unfortunately most of the engines, old ones, don't have that. Here's a Bendix Scintilla mag from a Mercury. Again, we'd hook those two wires, one here and one over here, and find a good place to bring them out. Like I say, you could drill a hole somewhere along, maybe in here or wherever, to make sure it's not chafing, wide open and at idle. And then we have an OMC type Magneto. Same deal, you'd hook your wire right here and right here, and again find an appropriate place to lead the wire, make sure it doesn't chafe. You might have to drill a hole in the back side or go through where the wiper is. It's probably the most difficult part of doing this, is bringing these wires from these screws and finding a good place to bring them out of the Magneto where it's not going to chafe. Okay, there's the OMC. Now we have a couple of special cases here. This would be an old Johnson from the 30s and 40s. Same deal. And in this particular case, this one does have shorting wires right here and right here that went to the shorting switch. And you could hook up your shorting switch right there. You could put your wire, which we'll talk about in a minute or two. But this one's all done. It's one of those ones that is done. This one is a twin-cylinder Magneto with missing the points. twin coils right there and there, but it only has one primary. So we can treat this like a single cylinder or a single magneto engine. It does not have to have both wires because it's only got one coil, even though it's firing two pistons. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to do. The second thing is, how do we hook this up? Well, I typically, for the two wires that we've just placed, I put a two-pole connector. They were used in trailer lights. There's a number of companies that sell them. Sealand is one. And the third wire, which would be the ground, I hook to the engine itself, to the engine ground. So how do we accomplish a stop switch that will, while the engine's running, not connect ground to either one of the 2-point systems? We use a double pole single throw switch, a DPST. Cole Hershey makes them. It's a 55017BX. And this is it right here. What it does is it connects, you hook your ground wires to this side right here, or this side, both of them together. You wire both the prongs together, and then you put your two singles coming from the points to these wires right here. This would be coming from your dashboard. And when the switch is thrown, it connects the ground to these two terminals right here. And again, I accomplish that with another one of these with long wires running up to the dash, and I have this switch. Now, the hard part is, how do we make this switch throw? And just like you were thinking, Nicky. All right. I use a mercury type that they used on the control box. I bring the switch up through, and then I screw this thing on top through the dashboard, and now I have my switch right there, which in the run position would have everything disconnected underneath here, and in the thrown position. But the newer switches have a longer arm on them, so you're not able to screw it on all the way and have it work properly. So what I do is I grind them off. I'll show you a grind off this one right here, and we'll get back to it and I'll show you how it works. And as you can see, I've ground off a little bit of the top with a grinding wheel. Now we hook this up to us, and when we fall overboard, well, if it goes, or if we fall away from the steering wheel, and it shorts out those two wires coming from the magneto to ground. So we would have, from this switch right here, we'd have 3 wires, one going to ground and one going to each one of the points through a connector like this, if you so wish. If you're making a permanent connection, you don't need to have the plug. You can run them right back to the engine. One to the engine ground and the other 2 to the magneto, to each coil in the magneto. All right, let's go to the 4-cylinder engines now. This is the Mercury Magneto. OMC's magnetos would be similar, some of the Fat 50s, so forth. There's one wire going to ground and one wire going to the kill switch post. And again, that's hooked up directly to this piece right here on this one. On the 2-cylinder engine, you have 2 magnetos, so these 2 wires, this one would be going to one set of points, this one to another. So you need a 3rd wire to short them to, which would be this grounding plate we talked about a little earlier. This grounding plate right here. And you can see that's where the ground wire goes in this particular case, because I changed this engine. Or you could run it inside of the engine and attach it to the block. But you would need that 3rd wire. 6-cylinder dual coil engine. We would have the switch hooked in between the positive feed to the coil. This one's jumped, so it feeds both coils. So we put the switch right in that wire, and instead of having it connect to cut it off, we'd have it disconnect when it cut off. So it'd be just the opposite. You wire it so that the switch, when you pull the lanyard, it disconnected between these two halves and stopped the current flow to the coils so it no longer would run. Okay, I think that covers it. Today's engines, typically, like this one right here, which has a CDI ignition, Johnson Evinrude the same way. This, I don't know about the Fisherman, but some of the earlier Johnsons, like this one right here, they have a single wire. So again, the stop switches you can buy in the open market, they will shut off this ignition system, and they've got typically a single pole, single throw switch in them because they don't have two coils to kill. The ignition system, the powering to the CDI ignition is shorted internally rather than shorting the two coils. So that's the way this ignition system's. So it's not an issue with the newer stuff. It's just the older ones that had dual coil ignition, dual coil, dual point ignitions. They were actually two separate magnetos, and they needed to be, both of them needed to be shorted to ground. If you short them to each other, the engine typically will still continue to run, although not very well.
Hey, why should people care about a kill switch? Why would anybody want to go through this bother of installing a kill switch?
Because in some of the boats that we run, we go a little bit too fast, they're not slow, you're planed off, and you could fall out of the boat going around a sharp corner. You could have the engine, if it's not bolted to the back of the boat, going around a corner, all of a sudden slide up because it's not tight enough, and the boat typically will go into a very tight turn and throw you right out of the boat. And when that happens, it's nice to have some means of killing that engine as you fall out of the boat. The racers today all have to have these kill switches. It's mandatory, along with the crash throttle.
Jerry Babcock did not have one in that boat.
No.
So if you have the lanyard hooked up to you and you get thrown out, it kills the motor.
Kills the motor, absolutely.
If you don't, you get thrown out, the motor's coming around in a tight turn, it could come right over you.
That's correct.
Or someone else. It's very
or
dangerous.
somebody else's boat as well.
Very dangerous.
Or if you go around that corner and you stay in the boat but you fall away from the steering wheel, the same result happens.
Right.
You're out of control and somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah. All right, that's very helpful. Thanks.